Everybody. I'm Samadi Thomas. I am a pollster with Change Research, and this is Beyond the Top Line. A couple of times a month, we bring data to conversations shaping politics, culture, and everyday life. We survey thousands of people across the country to understand not just what they think, but why they feel the way that they do. In our latest national media poll, we looked at loneliness, relationship, dating, and gender roles. And what became clear is that these aren't just personal or cultural issues, they're deeply tied to politics, social media, and the level of division people feel in the country right now. And this also feels especially timely as we head into the holidays when people are often surrounded by family and friends or coworkers, but they still feel a little disconnected. They might feel misunderstood or tense around conversations that might come up around the table. Today, I'm joined with my colleague, Melanie Phillips. She is our head of analysts and a principal researcher here at Change Research. Melanie keeps us all grounded and makes sure that all of us pollsters stay in line. So herding cats, if you will. Hey, Melanie.
Hey, Sumati. Really excited about this data. I've been studying gender and politics for over 15 years now. And this is one of those topics where everyone has strong opinions, but not a lot of shared facts or consensus, right? Everyone agrees it's important, but what does the data right now mean? And we're really lucky to be able to pull data from this moment right now. So, what we wanted to do with this research was separate what's actually changing from what people feel is changing. And perception is just as important because those things aren't always the same.
Yeah, exactly. And to understand really just these modern relationships, we have to really start one layer deeper with loneliness and how technology has fundamentally changed how young people connect today. Melanie, first thing that jumps out from some of these numbers when we're talking about just loneliness and connection is that 28% of men aged 18 to 34 say that it's harder to make new friends now, harder to make new friends now versus a few years ago. And among younger women, 18 to 34, that's 29%, nearly identical. Though, while this isn't a male loneliness epidemic that you often see in the headlines, we're seeing that this loneliness epidemic is actually more generational. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, this tracks exactly with what we're seeing in the data. I think we're focusing on it through the male lens, but really, I think the age lens is really important. When we look at the data, 48% of both young men and women rarely or never spend time in third places. Third places are community centers, bars, churches, shared social places. I anecdotally feel like COVID and the isolation that we all had to put ourselves in for public safety changed how we interacted and really took a generation that was just on the cusp of building their own communities post adolescence and interrupted that. And what we see now is that younger people are more isolated than they ever were before. Both communities that have less ties, they're moving more, but also they didn't have the fundamental time period to build these ties right as they started young adulthood.
Yeah, and another figure that just pops out to me, especially looking at this younger age group, we see that 29% of men and 29% of women ages 18 to 34 say they often feel lonely even when they're around others. So it's just this disconnect that we're seeing here. Like you mentioned with the third spaces, and people are constantly online, but like we're seeing that people are feeling lonely even when they are physically with people.
I wonder if that's can be and we would need to study this more in the data, but potentially two things, right? One, are people not as present in spaces? And this is all generations, right? When you're hanging out with people, how much are you still tied to your digital device? I think we're all kind of trying to move away from our digital obsessions, may you say. And I think anecdotally, this is why we're seeing the rise of a lot of crafty hand-based things as a knitter myself. But also, I'm wondering if there's just more conversations that people are participating in online about feeling lonely. And this is more of a talked about conversation. So I could see either of those two. What do you think?
Yeah, like just with more ways to connect with people. We have DMs, we have group chats, we have video calls. We also, just have people sending memes and videos to each other. Those are other ways to connect, but are they really creating those foundational relationships? A friend of mine and I, we kind of joke because we just with life and everything have time to hardly ever see each other in person, but we do constantly send each other TikToks throughout the day. And so we were just like, yes, I might have flooded your inbox with 30 random TikToks, but it also means that I thought of you 30 times a day. But are people, you have those kind of like little connections, but are people connecting that back to, is it really fulfilling their need for connection with people? Like, is that why they're still feeling lonely? Like, even though you have all these different ways now with technology to connect with people across the world, um, it seems like, especially for younger adults, that that's not really meeting that need of connection. Like, it's just very superficial.
It's almost this conversation of quantity over quality. Our quantity of connections has incredibly increased, right? But what about the quality of them? And is that resulting in like, yeah, this shared experience of loneliness? That's one thing that really stands out in this data is it's not a male loneliness epidemic, it's a shared loneliness epidemic among especially younger generations.
So we have this generation of young men and women facing nearly identical struggles with this connection. But one twist that I see here is that despite living through the same loneliness, they do see the world and each other's experiences in completely different ways. Yeah, so we have this, generation of young men and women facing these struggles, but there's really that perception gap here. One figure that really strikes me is just we ask people just the perception of who faces greater challenges when it comes to different things, and one of them was sexism. 52% of all respondents overall say that women face a greater challenge when it comes to sexism. When we break this down by gender, 62% of women believe this, but only 43% of men say that women face greater challenges when it comes to sexism. That's a 19-point gap. So, like, they're looking at the same screens, they're looking at their same Tinder and Hinge screens, the same dating apps, but really they're seeing completely different realities here about like just how sexism is affecting women. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think this makes sense. I think it's about lived experiences, and women are going to have a lived experience with this sexism probably quite frequently versus men may or may not see or have proximity to women who are living through experiences of sexism, but they are living through experiences of sexism they may perceive they're facing as well. And so I'd be curious next time we run that question, we should A B, or sorry, we for not the nerds out there, we should experiment and do switch women versus men and see if it switches. I would assume that we'd see the statistic flip if we did men. But I think it's not a difference of reality or acceptance, but I think a difference of daily life and lived experience of what they're seeing.
Yeah, one of the other things, just speaking about just these dating apps and looking, especially looking at younger men and women, we see that we ask people about just their choices when it comes to dating or finding a partner now versus in the past, and whether women face more of a challenge, men face more of a challenge, or if it's both. And 34% overall say that women have more choices when it comes to dating, and 19% say that men have more choices. Now, when we look at that just with younger men and younger women, 50% of men aged 18 to 34 believe that women have more dating choices. Looking at just younger women, only 15% agree that they themselves have more choices in the dating world. So we definitely have a lot more men saying that women have choices out there. And that's a large gap. That's a 35-point gap that we're seeing. And again, they're on these same apps and seeing the choices out there. But men obviously feel like women have more choices, while women feel like there are not that many fish in the pond to choose from. So men see volume, they see number of likes, they see matches and messages, while women, we're seeing quality. They're facing the harassment and they're thinking about safety risks, and uh, they're seeing low effort messages coming in their DMs just saying, hey, or sending pictures that they don't really want. But both are valid responses, but they're talking about really a fundamental difference experience. So just like, I've far removed from the dating world, but just kind of what are your thoughts about what that's like these days?
Yeah, I am too very far removed. I never actually had to get on a dating app. But I think what this actually highlights is that, and it makes sense why, if we go back to the loneliness number, it's the same. Because despite the different perception on who has it harder, people are struggling to connect. And right, this is very much in a heteronormative lens right now. And I think in future studies, we should expand this different lens of identity. But both sides think the other might have it easier because the lived experience of connecting right now is difficult for the person who's being asked. And yeah, it's what is the challenge? Is the challenge that there's not enough options, or is the challenge that there's not enough receptance? And so I think that's really fascinating. I think this is all, I go back to that, but both sides are still lonely, right?
Yeah.
And what way we look at these issues in connection on the digital devices, and what I think that level of rejection on both sides might feel like is really creating isolated individuals. And yeah, it might be hard to thinking about you feel lonely when you're in a room with people. Well, if you're in a room with people, but your device is getting 6 rejections on a dating profile, that is a lot of rejection to handle. And I think that definitely colors it. And it makes me think of some social psychology experiments where we should have individuals swap experiences in dating profiles, and see what that's like. So
Do you
yeah.
do you feel like this is where the algorithm is failing us? It shows us these metrics, without context. You get so many connections on an app. You get so many messages. You might get 500 matches, but that means something very different depending on the types of messages you are getting from those connections there. Just thinking about this from a technology standpoint, are these algorithms like overinflating some people's egos, or like really, really like making it just like the dating world is just super depressing because of how many matches you got, or like, the quality of matches that you get?
I think this goes back to quantity and quality. We are now in a world in which digital devices allow for massive amount of quality or quantity, sorry. But that makes it very difficult to engage with people in a quality or in a deep, actual, real way. And I think both sides of the equation are feeling that lack of quality because they have to deal with the quantity. And I think it kind of transcends a lot of our lives, right? How much do we have to do in a day that is making it so our ability to engage with our family, our friends, our hobbies, interests is lacking quality? And so I think that makes this totally makes sense. And this is why I like going beyond the top line, because the gap is there, but when you start looking at it, it's more of the where the potential ways of experiencing what we were measuring happens.
Yeah, as an elder millennial, I've told people before that I liked the internet better when it was young and new. There wasn't so many people on the internet because I felt like I could actually create lifelong friends through various channels on the internet back then, lots of different message boards and stuff. It was before social media, but I'm still friends today with some people that I've never met in person. But
Yeah.
we met online when basically they're like not everyone had a computer in their hands. And so there wasn't really that many people online. So I guess this goes back to your quantity versus quality um, thing because, yes, I might not have had that many, ton of interactions. There's no such thing as worrying about your how many followers you had and things like that that you have to deal with now on social media. But definitely had opportunities to create just real connections with people because people. I just, I guess I just sound like an old person saying people back then, kind of just like really just were looking for genuine connections instead of just clicks and likes.
Well, yeah, it's the quantity of what we're engaging with, right? The sheer amount of information, advertising, subliminal advertising that we interact with, that also pulls us away from taking anything really with face value. A lot of our research we have in other sections have been looking at overall distrust. And people and the interviews that I've been doing with people, no one really trusts a single source anymore. They're looking for a bunch of converging sources on the truth. And again, so they have to interact with quantity because there's a concern about quality.
Yeah, and that kind of points at some of the underlying things here, especially just us being pollsters looking at things and through a political lens. Is just with the algorithms, with this perception gap. You also have political polarization. You have people who can't even agree on what problems exist, let alone how to solve them. The data shows that young people across all the political spectrums, they're still feeling this isolation, but they're attributing this isolation to different causes. And that makes bridging this gap just nearly impossible. Um, so, where do these radically different perceptions come from? Part of it is just people very different and often contradictory pressures placed on just young men and women today, and that kind of leads us into just talking about just gender expectations and this like idea of like trad wives and masculinity and these conversations that people are having right now. We ask people just various statements about just society's expectations on men and women today. And the statement, men today are expected to be less masculine than in the past. We see that 64% of men agree with that statement. And that jumps even higher when you look at Republican men. 80% of Republican men agree that, society today expects men to be less masculine than in the past. And really, that 80% isn't just random. We've seen lots of talks on conservative media building entire platforms around this idea that masculinity is under attack. Whether the attack is real or perceived or a feeling, it's really driving people's everyday behaviors as well as their political behavior. What are your thoughts just about this?
Yeah, I think one, uh, this has been so prominent in the media, especially in conservative media. And so it totally makes sense that this jumps among Republican men. But also looking at the way identity in this binary really struggles. And I think this is why women have had over a decade of really strong focus on redefining femininity into multiple categories, right? Independent women, more traditional women, or how and the support behind being a stay-at-home homemaker or stay-at-home mom, and a lot of support on like there can be multitudes of facets of being a woman or being feminine. I don't think there's been that much attention on masculinity. There seems to be a monolith of what masculinity might mean in a society that has evolved away from the nuclear family and the traditional home. So there's almost a vacuum, I think, of what it can mean to be masculine, and how different forms of masculinity should be supported and applauded. And that I think results in a lot of dissatisfaction and tension among men because what was defined as success and what was defined as the model no longer fits with the evolution of what it means to be a woman has evolved. And so in a heteronormative relationship, you have two identities that no longer match, or are no longer um, symbiotic.
Yeah, and just looking at the same statement about just men's saying that society makes what make wants expects them to be less masculine. Only 47% of women agree with that statement. So
Mm.
there's just a large gender chasm here when it comes to believing this masculinity is an issue to begin with. I mean, on the more progressive side of social media, you tend to see lots of emphasis on toxic masculinity. So you have lots of young men that are kind of navigating this content that tells them that masculinity, or toxic masculinity in itself is a problem, or that defending any form of masculinity might make them regressive. That might be also feeding into just on the conservative media side and talking about this, there's this attack here where a lot of progressives might just say, just they're talking about just super toxic masculinity, not just being masculine in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah. I think what we are seeing is a society that has put standards across all groups that are incredibly hard to reach, and that reaching them together as men and women is really, really difficult, right? We have an economy that makes single income households and very, very difficult to achieve, and the pressure on the breadwinner. And then we have the pressure on the default parent or the default home manager is at odds. And I think this is going to result in tension and blaming on both sides. But what we're seeing is increased tension between men and women. And the gaps between men and women on ideology, on what they want in their future is just widening. But the problem is, I think, for at least many cases, they want the other partner in it to achieve the goals. And so, how do we reconcile this is going to be, I think, a prominent cultural issue in the United States.
Yeah, one other uh, data point that really stands out to me is we ask people just if they agree or disagree that society judges women more harshly than men when they don't want kids. And like, again, a just staggering gender gap here. 87% of women agree with that statement, while 52% of men agree. And when you look at younger men and women, women 18 to 34, 97% agree that women are judged more harshly when they don't want kids. And when you look at men, ages 18 to 34, only 54% agree with that. So you have 97% of young women saying that they feel more judged if they decide to not to have kids, but only 54%, only half of young men um, agree or feel like women have that pressure.
Yeah. Acknowledging my bias right out. I'm a child-free woman myself, but I think what I would actually say is that 54% is actually kind of high if you think about it. If you're thinking about, we mostly interpret data or questions through our lived experience of a lens. Almost all women have to think about how society will perceive them if they decide not to have children. Very few men, or not maybe a minority to small majority, have lived experience of watching either their spouses, their partners, or people in their lives face that. So I think the 54 is actually kind of high if you think about it like that. But again, I think it shows the daily I'm going to say the daily grind that individual go through contextualizes this. And
Mhm.
when people don't agree on what the reality is and they perceive the reality differently, it makes it very hard to get along,
Yeah.
right? So you take these women, almost all of them agree that this is really difficult, and you take half of men who don't. And then when the foundations are rocky like that, I think it makes it really difficult to find common ground.
Yeah, true. Another point from the same battery of questions is just, you know, we ask people, does society value traditional masculinity and femininity as much as society used to? And of course, there 75% overall agree with this statement, but of course we see some political differences and some gender differences here as well. 57% of Democrats say that society doesn't value traditional masculinity and femininity as much as it used to. But when you look at Republicans, 95% of Republicans agree with this statement. And then looking at the gender gap here, 66% of women agree, but we have 83% of men agreeing that society doesn't value these traditional gender roles.
Yeah, those gaps are quite notable. And I think I'll punch the question back to you in a second because you've been spending so much time in our media data. I wonder how much of this is the polarization of media's framing of these different things. I think looking at this data, I've tried to really take both sides and really look at how the experience is probably very similar, but it's just the framing and the daily lived experience that's different. And we know on conservative media, this is a hot topic, and also political ideology, right? You have self-sorting happening here. And on progressive media, the opposite is true, right? Meaning that the framing is very much on uh, changing the issues of traditional gender roles and what that means for our society. But I wonder how much of it is also the daily intake of data. If you're out there, I encourage you to do this experiment. Create a new YouTube account and set yourself as an 18-year-old white male and see what the algorithm automatically gives you. And then realize that that's the content that is being fed. We're all being fed content on any of our algorithms. None of us are above that, or can avoid that unless you're off the platforms. But if you want to see how much your base demographic, create a basic YouTube profile and see what it initially gives you. I think that's a really compelling experiment.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely feel like the algorithms on various social media platforms play a lot into this division. You just have different things on different news cycles focusing on different issues, and so some things might seem like more urgent, or that more people are talking about a certain issue when just overall general public it may or may not be the case there. We asked people, just what they valued more in men and women today. For the list of men, for men, we see that 39% overall say that financial success is valued more in men today, and that is far and above the top one. The next figure at 10% is emotional openness, and then at 6% intelligence. And that is that top three kind of pretty much goes across most demographic. We see that financial success is something that at least the respondents perceive as something that is more valued in men today. Now, when it comes to women, we see appearance rise to the top. 42% overall say that appearance is valued more in women today. And again, that's across all demographics. We're looking at politics, we're looking at, party ID, we're looking at gender, age, appearance is number one. And again, another very large gap between the top, you know, thing that's valued versus the second one. We see that 11% say that independent is more valued in women today. And then number three, we have a tie with financial success and personality as things that are valued more in women today. So it's just really interesting, especially, given that people say that these traditional gender roles aren't valued as much today. People kind of self sorted very traditional characteristics as things that are valued in men and women today. So it's kind of like, you know in their mind they're saying people don't value these traditional gender roles, but they chose pretty much uh like what I would think as like a stereotypical what people value in men and women today.
Yeah, it's this mismatch between expectations of society and the reality of society, right? Like being financial providers historically was the expectation of men, but this has radically changed in the last couple decades. And in fact, I don't know if it's the majority of households have a female breadwinner or a woman who is the breadwinner. But sorry, I'm going to redo this bit I started with. And I think that's the what's at odds with society today. The mismatch between the expectations of different gender roles and what it takes to be able to live and survive and thrive, at least in an American economy. Largely were perceived and had the role of a breadwinner, and women were constrained from that. Only the last couple decades can women have a bank account and have equality in many workforce settings, and equal pay is still something we're striving for. But women still, in many households, are either equal or, in fact, the breadwinner. And what does that mean when we haven't replaced what it means to be successful? Still, in many cases, and I think a lot of this is because if you focus on appearance, it's very marketable to sell things to women who are consumers, that you make it so there's constantly something to thrive for. But that's at odds with what most women who have been motivated for independence and career goals are doing in society. So it the the tension that it brings, or the lack of fulfillment and what that means, it's almost a modern day feminine mystique, what that means.
Yeah, the last question in this section here is really really interesting to me. I wasn't expecting the numbers to be so close overall, but you definitely see here some large political gaps. We ask people, when you think about the future, when you think about future generations, what would you prefer to see when it comes to gender roles? So we ask people, do you want to see more equality between men and women? Do you want to see a return to more traditional roles for men and women, or are you just not sure? 7% say that they want to see more equality between men and women, but we have 39% that say that they want to see a return to more traditional roles for men and women. Of course, when you look at that by party lines, among Democrats, we see 85% wanting to see more equality among the genders, while 73% of Republicans want to see a return to these traditional roles. When you look at men and women, we see that 63% of women want more equality, with 32% of men wanting the same, and 53% of men want to see this return to traditional roles, and only 23% of women agree with that. Two different realities that we're seeing here.
This is what I think the big question is, okay? If men and women still want to have heteronormative relationships with each other, how does that work? And my question to this data is returning to gender roles even possible in this economy we have? Like a truly traditional gender role would have a male figurehead who's the provider and a woman in the household running the household. But that's a single income household. Is that possible for the majority of Americans? And I would say the majority of Americans in an affordability crisis, it's not. And so is then returning to the traditional, the idea that women are both a financial provider and a household manager, because that isn't possible. That's going to lead to a lot of dissatisfaction and a lot of burden put on women in the household. So to me, when I look at this data, it's like, cool, you want to return to the traditional. I don't think that's possible.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
what
I
does
mean,
that mean?
completely true. I mean, these conflicting pressures don't stay abstract. So, people are answering a survey, it's just completely
Yep.
ideological. But these types of ideas, these types of way of thinking, they do manifest in real behavior, particularly, our young men and women, especially as they approach just how they approach dating and relationships today. 55% overall say that major political differences are a huge red flag or a red flag in a relationship. And we see that women are more likely than men to say that these political differences are a deal breaker. Um, Diving just deeper into it, MAGA Republican is widely viewed as a red flag, especially among women. Same for right leaning, being right leaning or conservative. We see that as being a red flag for women more so than men. But when you look at those, when we ask people if they're left leaning or progressive, is that a red flag or a green flag? We see that more men are saying that that is a red flag. So, really, people are just the sexes are divided here when it comes to just politics in general, having differences in politics, and which way you lean in politics is being seen as a red flag or a green flag when it comes to dating.
Yeah, what I think this is more about, and if you ask someone of an older generation, well, should you date someone of your same values? They would say, absolutely, you should date someone with your same values. And I think partisanship has now become a proxy for what you hold as core values. The problem is partisanship is now having a massive gender divide. So we're seeing that this cue or heuristic of partisanship is a proxy for, do we share same values? And therefore, this gender divide is going to widen possibly when it comes to the further, I would say, beddedness that values takes into partisan ideology.
Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting, especially like looking at the exact numbers here for anyone leaning left leaning or progressive. Just overall, 34% see that as a green flag, 38% see that as a red flag. Um, when it comes to being right leaning or conservative, we also see pretty much a split. 35% say that's a green flag. 31%, 35% say that's a red flag. But the interesting thing here to me is that when you parse out and say specifically that someone you're talking to is identifies as a MAGA Republican, we see that 28% overall say that's a green flag, but 49% say that that is a red flag. That's just really interesting to me. Just that partisan lean, and then of course that you see more emphasis when you break that out by gender,
Yeah.
especially among younger women. But even with that conservative and MAGA, having more people saying that those things might be red flags. If you own a gun, 47% say that that is a green flag. 36% say beige, and only 16% say that owning a gun is a red flag. So it's not, just it's not necessarily tied to specific things that might, usually owning a gun is seen as a conservative value, but obviously, people are seeing more nuance here than that when it comes to just dating and politics.
I wonder if this is we were talking earlier about the problem with the algorithms. On dating apps, you can put political status, and you almost have to because the lack of political status, I believe, is pretty much interpreted as conservative for men in many cases and liberal for women. But when you get down to the nuance, it doesn't break down what you believe in those or what are your core things. So it's creating a forced dichotomy that doesn't actually exist in practice, which we see. Yeah, conservative red flag, owning a gun, not so much a red flag. So what is the what is conservative telling us that these conservative or liberal on the other side facets not?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, speaking of just that social media impact there, 51% overall say that posting constantly on social media is a red flag. So being too online is broadly viewed negatively across, all genders here. It's, even posting constantly, being a red flag. Someone that's not on social media at all, 38% see that as a green flag, 55% see that is a beige flag, and 7% see that as a red flag. But when you look at it racially, just by different age groups, we see that women 18 and 34 say that not being on social media at all is a green flag by 47%, and 14% see as a red flag. But men, young men, 57% say that not being on social media at all is a green flag, and 3% say it's a red flag. It's just kind of interesting that, we have more men, by 10 points saying that not being on social media at all is a good thing. But it's also where a lot of young people are meeting people. So it's kind of weird because people, are yearning for that more in person experience.
And I think it's also like they're potentially trying to infer what a person values by whether or not they're posting online. But it does seem kind of like a double bind there. Like people generally meet online in some format, but people generally prefer people who are not as do not have as much of an online presence. I don't know if it's the millennial coming out in me, but I would view no online like existence as a red flag, but maybe that's because of the generation in which I came up in social media.
Yeah, yeah. Same for me too. As an elder millennial, I feel like, I want to be able to kind of see what their social footprint is.
Suss them out a bit, right?
Yeah. So, but kind of tying into that, I kind of wonder if just like the social media behavior ties into this lifestyle expectation, because 81% overall say that expecting luxury dating standards is a red flag. And just with social media having such an impact and people constantly trying to portray their lives in this, you know, glossified way, I kind of wonder if we're seeing kind of a backlash, especially in younger adults, of this, influencer culture that's kind of spanning everything.
Yeah, I maybe it's just the parts of the internet that my algorithm delivers to me, but definitely seeing this push back against like the hyper consumerist uh influencers and also that like portraying of high consumerism lifestyles. And I'm wondering if that's coming up in these like dating expectations as well. Again, I also think point to the economy, right? I think these expectations don't line up with the realities that people are experiencing day to day.
Yeah, yeah. And, because some of the other questions that we asked in this dating section is really interesting. Just kind of around the things just people expect, like if they are not able to find a partner, like what do they do? So 57% overall say that they're just going to stay true to who they are. If other people don't like it, that's just their issue. And we see here, especially under like among younger adults, a huge shift. 70% of women 18 to 34 say that they're just going to stay true to who they are. Um, but only 47% of men 18 to 34 say the same thing. And younger men are more likely to say that they're going to focus more on their career, their hobbies, or their goals, and just let relationships happen naturally. So it's just really interesting that you see more younger women just say, well, if I can't find a partner, I'm just going to stay true to who I am, and that's their issue. But you see more men just kind of digging more into they'll dig more into their careers or their hobbies instead of doing anything too. So really both groups are saying that if they can't find a partner, they're going to check out in some kind of way. But it's just interesting in how they describe how that looks.
I think that's interesting. And one, like I think it's a positive commentary on where society has grown. I mean, women 30 years ago probably would have had a higher amount of stigma associated to them if they were single. And there's been a lot of effort to change that cultural norm. But also, I think back to a data point that was recently released where like one of the top priorities men have in the future is having children. And that's like the ninth or 10th priority. I'm remembering a data point off the top of my head. So caveats there, that that's not their priority. And I think this kind of maybe explains some of that divide because the many cases it's when you have a partner that you would try to have children. So I think that's an interesting gap there that could really matter in the perception of things.
Yeah, another interesting finding from this question. Younger women say that if they're not able, if they're having a hard time finding a partner or a relationship, that they would prefer companionship and friendship over rushing into a romance. But only 37% of younger men feel the same
Hmm.
way. Another key difference that I'm seeing here in the data is that 48% of young women say that they would be extra careful about their safety. They screen more, avoid risky situations when it comes to, if they're having a hard time finding a partner. But we only see 13% of young men saying the same. But we do see some areas where young men and young women are more aligned. 45% of young women say that they would work on personal growth and therapy, self improvement, lifestyle changes to help, find a partner. And we see 49% of young men saying the same thing. About a quarter, 25% of women say that they would just take a break from dating and to be able to reset. And we see that 23% of young men would say that. So there are some areas where we see the genders align, but it's just really interesting to see those just big differences there.
Yeah, and I think this is something that has caught a lot of attention across many social outlets and media outlets. The gap is widening, and it's a partisan gap, a values gap, a priorities gap. And what does that mean when, in at least the heteronormative way, men and women come together to form the general family unit? And when they right when it's a red flag, what happens then?
Yeah, yeah. And really, here's the thing, so much of what we discuss, these unrealistic expectations, the political sorting, the communication breakdown, all of that is being turbocharged by a lot of these online ecosystems. They're designed for maximum engagement and not necessarily for human connection. And
Like
that
that.
kind of goes into just our next segment and just talking about how social media, is that amplifier. Yeah, so we have influencers curating these impossible relationship standards, plus easily accessible, just body standards, the way that people look at things like intimacy or just dating and romance. And these are warping how people think about what an ideal relationship should look like. Just looking at the numbers, we see that 52% say that influencers give people unrealistic expectations. 62% say that women are more likely to be victims of online abuse and stalking. Only 5% say that this is affecting men. 60% say that the internet has made extreme views more common and visible. And 26% say, only 26% say that the internet helps lonely people find communities. So we see a majority of people saying that the social media atmosphere, this ecosystem, they're saying more negative things about it than they are positive. So it just kind of leads into just, how is this affecting people's like real life relationships? How is it affecting how people communicate, even beyond any kind of romantic relationship, just communicating as friends, communicating as neighbors, as coworkers, and finding common ground, because you do have areas and pockets of the internet that are kind of making people look at more extreme views. So, just what are your thoughts? Like, how can we get back to, just having just regular everyday conversations with people without it being so intense from these social media platforms?
I think everyone needs to realize they're in an echo chamber of some type, right? Like, no matter who you are, the media you're being delivered is being curated to be media that you engage with the most. And things that make you engage or rage, anxiety, any of these things, the algorithms are meant to deliver you this. And also, most people making content now are making money, some type of money off of something. And so why are they presenting that content? So to me, I think the solution has got to be to abandon the algorithm for this type of connection or its spaces, community. Try to be into the physical or into online spaces that you have curated yourself, right?
Mhm.
I think we reflected on a beautiful time in the internet when we weren't being sorted by such crazy behavioral and demographic characteristics, and finding spaces in which you can create that are welcoming to not just your own perspective. But I think the first step is everyone should recognize the echo chamber they're in. I'm in an echo chamber, you're in an echo chamber. And the more exposure you can get outside your echo chamber, the better.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. Like the algorithm truly, doesn't care about nuance or bridge building. They only care about engagement and really that outrage, that fear, those extreme positions that drives that engagement. So that's what gets amplified. We see that 60%, say that the internet has made extreme gender views more visible and common. And we're seeing this played out in real time. We see that younger men are being served this manosphere type content about the dating market, and young women are getting served content that the world is scary, that there are so many threats out there. But then you also have on the opposite side just this trad wife uh, type of content, setting different standards for what your future should look like. So there's this constant back and forth and constant stream of just extreme views being sent to people. So just really on this feedback loop, let's trace that cycle. You just have online content that shapes these unrealistic expectations. People being bringing those expectations to their relationships, whether it's romantic or friends or family or whatever. And then you have people failing because
Yeah.
those connections, those relationships fail to match that fantasy of these unrealistic expectations that you're seeing online.
And I
So then you
think
see people that just retreat more back online and be isolated, and then it just loops again.
And I think the trad wives example is a beautiful example of how it's all impossible, right? Trad wives are marketing an idea of a stay-at-home homemaker woman, but these trad wife influencers themselves are not that. They're business women, they're breadwinners. They've marketed and monetized a lifestyle that they, in fact, by doing so, do not even live. And so they're essentially selling an impossible thing, and people are buying it and then put in an impossible decision because they can't live it.
Mhm.
I think that's the most fascinating thing about the trad wife things. They're all breadwinners and all businesswomen, which is against the ideology in many cases.
Yeah, but just like I guess the crux of this research is, can we separate what technology has enabled from what technology enables us to do from what it amplifies? We're seeing these gender tensions, these political tensions, but were they always there, or did social media create them? Are they just amplifying what's already kind of lurking in the shadows?
Oof, that's a
Really,
question.
the honest answer is probably both. And that really makes some of these solutions a little bit harder on how to get back. to bringing people more together. Do you feel like at least younger adults are a little bit more aware of the algorithm and the fact that some of these expectations are unrealistic? Really, like you said, we need to understand that our online presence is largely controlled by algorithms. That much of the things that we see from influencers are perfectly curated, and I feel like that's really the first step towards resisting it and hopefully getting people out to touch grass.
Yes. Get outside, touch grass, and realize that everyone's interpretation of the questions, even asked in this poll, is lensed through their own environment.
Yeah, and with that, that's our time. It's really clear from the data that we're navigating a really complex moment. Young men and women are reporting, near identical levels of loneliness, yet they perceive each other's experiences from completely different planets. And technology isn't neutral to this. But thanks so much, Melanie, for joining me. And thank you so much to all of our listeners that stayed through all of this to listen. If you want to dive deeper into the findings of this poll or explore more of our research, we love to research on all things politics, culture, and how the data is shaping American life. So visit us at changeresearch.com, but we'll see you next time.